I am 78 years old, and yesterday my daughter told me I should stop dreaming about travel, that my body is too frail, my heart too weak, that the world has moved on without me, and I should be content watching it from my living room window. She said it with love. I know she did, with that same patient tone she uses when explaining things to her own children, as if I've become a child myself, someone who needs protecting from my own foolish hopes. But sitting here now in this quiet house, with the afternoon light falling through the curtains in golden strips across the worn carpet, I realize that she never knew me at all. None of them did. They look at me and see an old woman, whose best years are behind her, whose dreams should be modest and small, who should be grateful for her comfortable chair and her television programs and her weekly visits from family, who check their watches when they think I'm not looking. But what they don't see, what they could never understand, is that I've been traveling my entire life, even when my feet never left the ground, even when the walls of my world grew so narrow I could touch both sides with my outstretched arms. My name is Eleanor Rose Mitchell, though my mother called me Ellie and my father called me his little songbird, because I was always humming, always dancing, always filled with this restless energy that had nowhere to go. I grew up in a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business, where the biggest excitement was the county fair in August, and the Christmas pageant at the Methodist church. We lived in a white house with blue shutters on Maple Street, and in the summer the air would get so thick with the scent of honeysuckle, that you could almost taste the sweetness on your tongue, and in the winter the snow would fall so quiet and soft that the whole world seemed to hold its breath. My father worked at the lumber mill, came home every evening with sawdust caught in the creases of his work shirt, and exhaustion carved into the lines around his eyes. My mother kept the house, kept us children fed and clean and proper, kept everything running with the kind of quiet strength that nobody noticed until it was gone. I was the youngest of four, the dreamer, the one who would lie in the grass behind the house, and watch the clouds drift across the sky like great white ships sailing to places I'd only read about in books, places with names that felt like music in my mouth. Paris, Morocco, Istanbul, Buenos Aires. I wanted to see the world so badly it hurt, a physical ache that lived somewhere beneath my ribs. I would go to the library every Saturday and check out travel books, encyclopedias, anything with pictures of faraway places, and I would lose myself in those pages for hours. I memorized the shapes of countries, the names of oceans, the heights of mountains I would never climb. My mother would find me like that sometimes, curled up in the window seat with a book spread across my lap, and she would sigh this tired, sad sigh and say, "Ellie, honey, you need to come back down to earth. Dreams are fine for children, but you're getting to be a young woman now, and young women need to be practical." But I didn't want to be practical. I wanted to be extraordinary. When I was 17, I met James Mitchell at a church social. He was 23, just back from 2 years in the army, stationed in Germany, though he never talked much about what he'd seen there. He was handsome in that clean-cut, all-American way, with blonde hair he kept neatly combed and blue eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. He had a good job lined up at his uncle's insurance agency, a reliable car, prospects, as my mother said with approval in her voice. He courted me the proper way, with flowers and Sunday dinners with his family, and talks on the porch swing, while my father watched from the living room window. He told me I was beautiful, told me I was special, told me he wanted to take care of me for the rest of my life. He painted a picture of our future together, a nice house in a good neighborhood, children, stability, respectability. A good life, he called it, a safe life. I said yes because I was 17, and I didn't know yet that there are different kinds of cages, and some of them are built with love and good intentions. I said yes because everyone expected me to, because my mother looked so relieved and my father shook James's hand with genuine warmth and my friends all said I was so lucky. I said yes because I thought maybe this restless thing inside me would settle down once I had a purpose, once I belonged to someone. I was so young. I didn't understand yet that you can't kill your own spirit without killing something essential in yourself. We were married on a Saturday in June, in the same church where I'd been baptized, where I'd sung in the choir as a little girl, where my grandmother's funeral had been held 3 years before. I wore my mother's wedding dress, altered to fit my smaller frame, and I carried white roses that smelled like hope and endings all at once. I remember standing at the altar, looking at James, and feeling this strange sensation, like I was watching myself from somewhere far away, like I was already a ghost at my own wedding. But I smiled and said my vows and meant them, because I wanted to mean them, because I thought that wanting something badly enough could make it true. We moved into a small house on the east side of town, a tidy little place with a white picket fence, and a garden I was supposed to tend and rooms that I filled with furniture we bought on credit. James went to work every morning at 8 and came home every evening at 6, regular as clockwork, and I kept the house clean, and learned to cook the meals his mother had taught me, and waited for my life to feel like it belonged to me. But it never did. Every day felt like I was reading lines from a script someone else had written, playing a part in a story I'd never chosen. I would stand at the kitchen sink washing dishes, and look out the window at the sky, at the birds flying south in the fall, at the clouds moving endlessly across the blue, and I would feel this desperate ache, this hunger for something I couldn't even name. Our first child came 10 months after the wedding, a daughter, Catherine, with dark hair and serious eyes that seemed to look right through me. Then came Michael 2 years later, then another daughter, Anne, then the twins Robert and Daniel. 5 children in 8 years, and my body was exhausted, stretched thin, marked with the evidence of all those lives I'd grown and birthed and nursed. I loved them desperately, with a fierce protectiveness that surprised me with its intensity. But loving them didn't fill the emptiness inside me. Sometimes I would wake in the night with my heart pounding, feeling like I was suffocating, like the walls of the house were pressing in on me, and I would go stand on the back porch in my nightgown, and breathe the cool air, and cry without making a sound so I wouldn't wake anyone. James was a good provider. He advanced at the insurance agency, we moved to a bigger house in a better neighborhood, we had money for new clothes, and family vacations to the lake, and Christmas presents piled under the tree. But he was also a stranger to me, more and more with each passing year. He didn't understand why I sometimes seemed sad when I had everything a woman could want. He didn't understand why I would spend hours in the attic going through my old books, my old maps, my old dreams. We stopped talking about anything that mattered. We had conversations about schedules and bills, and what needed fixing around the house, but we never talked about how I felt like I was dying inside, how some nights I would lie awake beside him and feel so alone I could barely breathe. Then one Thursday afternoon when I was 32 years old, everything changed. I was at the grocery store, going through my list the way I did every week, when I saw him. David Chen. He was standing in the produce section, holding a cantaloupe up to his nose and smiling to himself, and something about that simple gesture made my heart stop. He looked up and saw me staring and smiled, and it was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. "Excuse me," he said, "but do you know how to tell if these are ripe? I'm hopeless with fruit." His accent was slight but noticeable, musical, his voice warm with self-deprecating humor. I helped him pick a melon, and we started talking. And I learned that he was an artist, that he'd moved to town 6 months ago to teach at the community college, that he'd grown up in San Francisco in a family of immigrants, who'd built a life from nothing but hope and hard work. He told me he loved to paint landscapes, to travel and capture the light in different places, and when he talked about it his whole face lit up with passion. We stood there in that grocery store for 45 minutes, talking about art and travel, and the way the light fell through the leaves of the trees outside, and I felt more alive than I had in 15 years. I should have walked away. I should have smiled politely and gone back to my list and my life and forgotten about the way he made me feel. But I didn't. I met him for coffee the next week, just as friends, I told myself. Then we met again, and again. We would sit in a booth at the diner on the edge of town, where nobody I knew would see us, and we would talk for hours about everything and nothing. And for the first time since I was a girl I felt like someone actually saw me, the real me, not just the role I played. David listened when I talked about my dreams of travel, my love of maps and faraway places. He didn't tell me to be practical or grateful for what I had. Instead he said, "Eleanor, you know it's not too late. You could still go. You could still see the world." I fell in love with him slowly, the way snow accumulates, flake by flake, until suddenly the whole landscape has changed. I didn't mean to. I fought it. I told myself I was just lonely, that this was just a friendship, that I would never actually betray my vows. But the heart doesn't listen to logic. The heart wants what it wants, and mine wanted him with an intensity that frightened me. We never crossed that final line, never actually became lovers in the physical sense, but in every other way I was unfaithful. I gave him the parts of myself I'd never given to James, my dreams, my fears, my true self. It went on for 6 months, this beautiful, terrible secret that I carried like a jewel and a stone at the same time. I would come home from seeing David and look at my husband, at my children, and hate myself for what I was doing, for what I was feeling, but I couldn't stop. I needed those conversations the way I needed air. Then one evening in November, James came home early from work and found David's number written on a piece of paper in my coat pocket. Just his first name and a phone number, but it was enough. He knew. Maybe he'd known for a while and had been waiting for proof. Had the worst fight of our marriage that night, after the children were in bed. He called me terrible things, words I'd never heard him use, and his face was twisted with hurt and rage and betrayal. I tried to explain that nothing physical had happened, that it was just friendship, but the words sounded hollow even to me, because the truth was that I had betrayed him, not with my body but with my heart, and maybe that was worse. He demanded that I never see David again, never speak to him, that I give up whatever foolish fantasy I'd been entertaining, and I agreed. What else could I do? I had 5 children, no money of my own, no skills that would support us. I was trapped, and we both knew it. I called David the next day from a payphone, and told him we couldn't see each other anymore. And the sound of his voice when he said he understood, that he'd always known this was temporary, that he hoped I'd be happy. That sound broke something in me that never fully healed. I went home and I was the perfect wife after that. I tried so hard to make it up to James, to prove my loyalty, to kill the part of me that still dreamed of other lives, and slowly, year by year, I succeeded. That restless spirit that had defined me grew quieter, smaller, until it was just a whisper I could barely hear. The children grew up. Catherine became a doctor, married a lawyer, moved to Boston and had children of her own who I saw maybe twice a year. Michael went into business, made a fortune in real estate, divorced twice, always too busy for more than a phone call on holidays. Anne became a teacher, married young to a man who reminded me uncomfortably of James, settled 3 towns over and visited dutifully every Sunday with forced conversation and tight smiles. The twins both moved away for college and Beverly came back, Robert to Seattle, Daniel to Atlanta, living their own lives in which I was a peripheral figure, a duty to be fulfilled. And James and I grew old together, 2 people who'd once loved each other living side by side like courteous strangers. We had our routines, our shared history, our grandchildren who called on birthdays. We had everything except understanding, except passion, except the kind of deep knowing that makes a marriage more than just a contract. Sometimes I would look at him across the dinner table and wonder who he really was beneath the familiar face, and I knew he was thinking the same thing about me. Then 3 years ago, on a Tuesday morning in March, James had a stroke while reading the newspaper. Massive and sudden, the doctors said. He died in the hospital 12 hours later without regaining consciousness, and I sat beside his bed holding his hand and felt so many things I couldn't name. Grief, yes. For the man he'd been when we first met, for the life we'd tried to build, for all the E-words we'd never said. But also relief. A quiet, shameful relief that it was over, that I wouldn't have to keep pretending anymore. And then guilt for feeling relieved, and sadness for that guilt, layers and layers of complicated emotions that had no easy answer. The children came for the funeral, stayed a few days to help settle the estate, then returned to their own lives. They expected me to be devastated, and I was, but not in the way they thought. I was devastated by all the wasted years, by the dreams I'd buried, by the woman I'd never let myself become. Catherine suggested I sell the house and move into a retirement community where there would be activities and people my own age. Michael wanted me to move to a smaller place, something easier to maintain. They talked about me like I wasn't there, making plans for my diminished future, and I nodded and agreed because it was easier than arguing. But then one night, about a month after James died, I was cleaning out the attic and I found an old box I'd forgotten about. Inside were my travel books from when I was a girl, my maps, a journal I'd kept when I was 17 full of all the places I'd wanted to see, and underneath it all was a photograph, creased and faded, of David Chen. I don't even remember taking it, but there he was, smiling at the camera, young and alive and full of possibility. I sat there on the dusty attic floor holding that picture, and I cried harder than I'd cried at James's funeral, cried for the woman I'd been, for the choices I'd made, for the life I'd never lived. The next morning I went to the library and got on the computer, something I'd never been comfortable with, and I searched for David's name. It took me an hour, fumbling with the keyboard, squinting at the screen, but I found him. He was still teaching, still painting, widowed 5 years ago, living in New Mexico. There was a picture of him on the college website, older now with silver hair but still with those warm eyes, that gentle smile. Before I could talk myself out of it, I wrote him an email, my fingers curly on the keys, telling him who I was, asking if he remembered me, apologizing for all the years of silence. He wrote back 3 hours later. Of course he remembered me. He'd thought about me often over the years, wondered how my life had turned out, hoped I'd been happy. We started emailing every day, then talking on the phone, and it was like no time had passed at all. We talked about everything, our marriages, our regrets, the children we'd raised, the dreams we'd abandoned. He told me he'd never stopped traveling, that he'd spent his summers visiting different countries to paint, that seeing the world had saved him in some fundamental way. And then, one day he said, "Eleanor, come visit me, come see New Mexico. You always wanted to travel, it's not too late." I should have been afraid, 75 years old, never been on a plane, haven't seen this man in over 40 years. But instead I felt excited, terrified, alive in a way I hadn't felt since I was 17. I booked a ticket without telling the children, packed a small suitcase, and flew to Albuquerque on a Tuesday in June. David picked me up at the airport, and when I saw him waiting there, holding a bouquet of wildflowers, my heart did this strange leap, and I knew I'd made the right choice. We spent 2 weeks together, talking and laughing and remembering. He took me to see the painted desert, and the canyon lands and the ancient cliff dwellings, and I saw colors I didn't know existed, light that seemed to come from inside the earth itself. We held hands like teenagers and stayed up late talking about art and beauty and all the time we'd lost. And one night, sitting on his porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple and gold, he said, "I never stopped loving you, Eleanor. Not for one single day in 43 years. I went home after those 2 weeks, but something had changed. I'd gotten a taste of the life I'd always wanted, and I couldn't go back to being the woman my children expected me to be. I started planning another trip, this time to France, something I'd do on my own. I bought new suitcases, got a passport, started taking French lessons online, and that's when Catherine found out. She came over unannounced one afternoon and saw my passport and travel books, and she was horrified. She called her siblings, and they staged what I suppose they thought was an intervention. They sat me down in my own living room, and told me I was being reckless, that I was too old for this kind of adventure, that I needed to think about my health, my limitations, my responsibility to them to stay safe. Catherine actually said, "Mom, what about us? What if something happens to you in some foreign country? How would we even know?" Yesterday was the culmination of all that concern. Catherine came by with brochures for assisted living facilities, places with names like Golden Years and Sunset Meadows, places where people go to wait to die. And she said those words that have been echoing in my head ever since, "Mom, you need to stop dreaming about travel. Just stay home. Be content with what you have. You're too old for this." And I looked at her, at this accomplished woman who'd become a stranger to me, and I realized that she'd never known me at all. None of them had. They'd known the role I played, the mother and wife and grandmother, but they'd never known Eleanor, the girl who wanted to fly. So I made a decision. This morning I booked a one-way ticket to Paris, leaving next week. I'm not coming back, not to this house, not to this life, not to the small, safe existence my children think I should be grateful for. I called David and told him my plans, and he laughed this wonderful, joyful laugh and said, "Good for you, Ellie, good for you. I've arranged to sell the house, to liquidate my assets, to take what's mine and finally live the life I should have lived 50 years ago. I'm 78 years old, and I'm going to see the world. I'm going to stand in front of the Eiffel Tower and the pyramids and the ruins of Rome. I'm going to taste wine in Tuscany and eat paella in Barcelona and watch the sunrise over Machu Picchu. I'm going to die doing what I love, seeing what I was always meant to see, being who I was always meant to be. And if it's reckless, if it's foolish, if I die in some foreign country far from my children who never really knew me anyway, well, at least I'll die free." I've written letters to each of them, explaining as best I can, though I don't expect they'll understand. I've told them I love them, that I'm proud of who they've become, but that I need to do this. Need to claim what's left of my life before it's too late. I've left them the house, the furniture, the accumulated possessions of a lifetime of staying in one place. But I'm taking my dreams with me, the ones I buried so long ago, the ones that never really died. Tomorrow I'll call Catherine and tell her I won't be needing those brochures, that I've made other plans. She'll be upset, maybe even angry, but that's okay. She'll survive. They all will. People always do. And maybe, just maybe, someday they'll tell their own children about their crazy grandmother who ran away to see the world at 78. And maybe it will plant a seed in those young minds, a seed that says it's never too late to choose yourself, to honor your own spirit, to refuse to let other people's fears and expectations define the boundaries of your life. I'm packing now, folding clothes I've never worn, tucking away the photograph of David that I've kept hidden all these years. The afternoon light is fading, painting the walls of this house gold, and I feel no sadness about leaving it. This house was never home. Home is wherever I'm finally free to be myself. Home is in the journey, in the miles I'll travel, in the spirit that carries me forward despite my aging body and my trembling hands. They said I'm too old to travel, that I should just stay here and be grateful, and wait quietly for the end. But they forgot that my spirit carries miles within me, distances they can't measure, journeys they can't understand. They forgot that I've been traveling all along, even when I never left, that I've crossed deserts of loneliness and scaled mountains of regret and navigated oceans of unspoken dreams. This is just the final leg of a journey I started the day I was born. Next week I'll board that plane, and when it lifts off the ground I know I'll feel my heart lift with it, finally free. And whatever happens after that, whether I have 6 months or 6 years, whether I make it to every country on my list or just a few, I'll know that I honored the girl I was, the woman I should have been, the spirit that refused to die no matter how hard I tried to bury it. That's all any of us can do, really. Honor who we are, even when it's terrifying, even when everyone tells us we're being foolish. Honor the voice inside that whispers where we're meant to go, what we're meant to become. I am 78 years old, and my real life is just beginning. They said I'm too old, but they were wrong. I'm exactly the right age. I'm finally old enough to be brave.